He grabbed the old nurse by the throat and lifted her off the ground like she weighed nothing. "Where is room 2?" he demanded, his voice barely above a whisper, which somehow made it worse than if he had screamed. She clawed at his wrist. Her feet kicked at the air. He watched her struggle with the patience of a man who had done this before and found it tedious. Then he threw her into the wall and stepped over her body without looking down. Behind him, 3 more armed men flooded the corridor, weapons raised, shouting in 2 languages at once. Nobody fought back. Nobody even breathed. Nobody except one rookie nurse at the end of the hall, who quietly reached up and tied her hair back. Before we go any further, if this story already has your heart pounding, please subscribe to this channel and follow this story all the way to the end. And drop a comment below telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now, let's go back to the beginning. It started, like most disasters do, with something ordinary. The night shift at Mercy West Medical Center began at 11 p.m., and by 11:15 the emergency department was already a controlled hurricane. Gurneys rolled past. Monitors beeped. A man in the corner was shouting about his arm, and a woman across from him was crying quietly into a paper cup of coffee that had long gone cold. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with that particular tone that made everything feel both urgent and exhausted at the same time. Khloe Adams stood at the nurse's station, squinting at a medication chart like it had personally offended her. Adams, the charge nurse, a broad-shouldered woman named Patricia Reyes, with 22 years of night shifts behind her, and absolutely no patience left in her body, snapped her fingers twice. "That's the Caldwell chart, not a crossword puzzle. Just write the dosage and move on." "I know, I just want to make sure I'm reading the decimal point correctly," Khloe said without looking up. "It's a 2. It's always a 2. Last week it was a 0.2, and the difference matters, Patricia." Patricia stared at her for a moment. "Fine, check it, then move it. We've got 3 incoming from a freeway pileup, and I need you to stop looking like a deer in headlights every time someone bleeds on you." Khloe didn't respond to that. She just nodded, made the note, clipped the chart shut, and set it in the outgoing tray with a precision that was so quietly deliberate it almost looked like the opposite of rushing. It wasn't. She was moving exactly as fast as she needed to. She just made it look like something else. That was a habit, an old one. She had been at Mercy West for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of being the rookie. 6 weeks of Patricia's sighs and Dr. Marcus Webb's raised eyebrows, and the older nurses trading glances over her head like she was a slow student they hadn't figured out how to fail yet. She had spilled a tray of instruments in her 3rd week, and the story had already taken on a life of its own in the break room. She had asked too many questions in her first. She had, on one memorable occasion, walked into a supply closet thinking it was the staff bathroom, and a nurse named Danny Chen had not stopped bringing it up since. None of it bothered her, not in the way people thought it did anyway. She felt it. She wasn't cold. But when you had spent 3 years in environments where the wrong reaction at the wrong moment could end your life or someone else's, you learned to keep your feelings on a very tight leash. You learned to look harmless when you needed to. You learned to be forgettable. Khloe Adams was very, very good at being forgettable. By midnight, the freeway pileup victims had arrived, and the ER had officially crossed the line from busy into chaotic. 2 of the 3 were critical. The 3rd was a teenage boy with a broken collarbone who kept trying to call his mother on a cracked phone that wouldn't turn on. And Khloe spent 4 minutes sitting with him while the doctors were occupied. Not saying much, just being there, keeping her hand close to his without touching it until he stopped hyperventilating. "You're going to be okay," she told him quietly. "How do you know?" he asked. "Because the hard part already happened. You're here. The rest is just details." He looked at her like that was the strangest comfort anyone had ever offered him. But he stopped hyperventilating. She stood up, went back to work, and didn't think about it again. Around 1 a.m., a new admission came in through the ambulance bay that made the entire ER go quiet in a way that felt different from the usual quiet. It wasn't the hush of professionalism. It was the hush of people recognizing something dangerous. The patient was a man in his late 30s, dark-haired, heavily built, with 3 gunshot wounds and the kind of tattoos that told a story if you knew how to read it. He was barely conscious. His blood pressure was dropping. The paramedic, rattling off his stats, kept her voice deliberately flat, the way paramedics did when they wanted to communicate urgency without triggering panic in the surrounding staff. Dr. Webb took one look at the man and his jaw tightened. "Trauma Bay 2, he said. "Now." Khloe was part of the team that moved the gurney. She helped transfer the patient, handed off the IV line, stepped back to make room for the trauma team. She caught a look at the man's tattoos as they cut away his shirt. A snake eating its own tail on his right shoulder. A set of numbers in a specific arrangement on his left forearm. She recognized the imagery the way you recognized a song you hadn't heard in years. It came back to her in pieces. Not memory exactly, but the muscle version of it. The knowing that lived in the body. She stepped back. She kept her face neutral. She went back to the nurse's station, and she did not say a single word. Danny Chen appeared beside her about 10 minutes later, leaning on the counter with that particular energy he had when he was about to share something he shouldn't. "You hear about the guy in trauma too?" he said, voice low. "I helped bring him in," Khloe said. "Yeah, but did you hear? Patricia says one of the paramedics recognized him. Says he's someone, like someone. Danny, I'm just saying, Webb looks like he swallowed a brick, and the paramedic wouldn't give her name for the report, which, I mean, that's not a good sign, right?" Khloe looked at him. "Go check on your patients. You're no fun. Go, Danny." He went, muttering something under his breath that she chose not to hear. She turned back to her station. She pulled up the next chart. She focused on the work. She focused on breathing steadily and being Khloe Adams, rookie nurse, 6 weeks on the job, scared of decimals in supply closets and the charge nurse's disappointment. She did not focus on the snake eating its own tail. She did not focus on the numbers on the forearm. She did not focus on the cold feeling that had settled somewhere below her ribs. The feeling that had nothing to do with the air conditioning and everything to do with pattern recognition and the particular kind of dread that came from knowing, before the evidence fully arrived, that something was coming. It was 1:47 a.m. She had 27 minutes. The waiting room had thinned out slightly by 2 a.m. The freeway pileup had absorbed most of the department's attention, and the walk-ins had slowed to a trickle. Patricia had sent 2 nurses on break. Dr. Webb was still in Trauma Bay 2. The hospital had settled into that particular late-night rhythm where everything felt slightly underwater, slower and heavier and dimmer, and the people still awake were running on caffeine and muscle memory. Khloe was restocking the supply cart in the east corridor when she heard the doors. Not the automatic sliding doors of the main entrance. Those were quiet, almost apologetic in how they open. These were different. These were the heavy utility doors at the ambulance bay, the ones that were supposed to be locked after hours, and they opened with the sound of something that had been forced rather than unlocked. She stopped moving. She didn't turn around right away. She stood very still, one hand resting on the shelf of the supply cart, and she listened. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving with that particular cadence that wasn't the shuffle of patients or the quick, precise steps of medical staff. This was something else. This was coordinated. This was deliberate. This was the sound of people who had rehearsed their entrance. She heard Patricia's voice from the nurse's station. "Excuse me, this area is restricted. You need to check in at the front." Then the sound that ended everything else. 3 shots, semi-automatic, ceiling. Patricia screamed. Monitors screamed. Someone at the far end of the hall hit the floor, and then a voice, accented and completely calm, filled the corridor like it owned it. "Nobody move. Nobody call. You do what we say, everybody walks out of here. You make this difficult, and this hospital becomes a crime scene. Your choice." Khloe did not move. She was still facing the supply cart. Her back was to the corridor. Her hand was still on the shelf. From the outside, she might have looked frozen, terrified. One of the ones who goes statue still when the fight or flight response can't decide. She was not frozen. She was counting. 4 distinct voices in the time since the doors open. 1 giving orders, 2 moving down the corridor in opposite directions based on footstep echo, 1 holding position near the entrance. Semi-automatic weapons, at least 2 confirmed. 3 shots to the ceiling meant either intimidation or warning, which meant they wanted compliance, not immediate casualties. They had a target, the man in Trauma Bay 2. This was a retrieval operation, not a massacre. That was useful. That changed the math considerably. She heard Danny's voice from the break room down the hall, high and frightened. "What is, oh God?" "On the ground." A new voice closer. "On the ground right now." The sound of Danny hitting the floor. The sound of other staff following. The sounds of compliance spreading through the department like a wave. People going down one by one as the gunmen moved through the space. Patricia, to her credit, didn't go quietly. These are patients. There are critically ill people in these rooms. You can't just... "Lady," the calm voice again, closer now, maybe 20 feet from Khloe's position. "I'm not here to debate. Get down." A pause. Then the sound of Patricia's knees hitting the floor. And Khloe heard something in that pause, in the 2 seconds before Patricia went down, that she suspected nobody else in that corridor was in a state to hear. She heard Patricia's breathing. She heard the way it changed. The charge nurse with 22 years of night shifts was terrified, yes, but she was also taking stock, looking around, counting the same way Khloe was counting. Good. Khloe was going to need that. She took 1 long, quiet breath. She looked at the supply cart in front of her. She assessed what was there with the rapid, clinical focus of someone who had learned to turn available materials into options a long time ago in places that made this hospital corridor look like a park on a Sunday afternoon. Oxygen canister, surgical tape, scalpels sealed in packaging, IV tubing, a box of nitrile gloves, a blood pressure cuff still in its case, a wall-mounted fire extinguisher 6 feet to her left. Her mind moved through the geometry of the corridor, the layout she had memorized not out of nerves, but out of habit, because she always memorized the layout of whatever space she was in, always identified exits in choke points, and the location of anything that could be used as cover or as a tool. She thought about the man in Trauma Bay 2. She thought about the tattoos. She thought about the numbers on his forearm. There were pieces she didn't have yet. She needed more information before she moved. Moving without information was how people got killed. She knew that the way she knew her own heartbeat. She stayed still. She kept her breathing even. She waited. The footsteps of the nearest gunman were getting closer. "You." His voice was directly behind her now. "Turn around. Slowly." She turned around slowly. He was younger than she expected. Mid-20s maybe. Dark jacket, dark pants, balaclava pulled up to show the lower half of his face. The gun in his hands was a modified Glock, and he was holding it with the casual, bored familiarity of someone who had been carrying since before he was old enough to vote. His eyes moved over her quickly, dismissively, the way people moved over things they didn't consider threats. She made sure he saw what he was looking for. Wide eyes, slightly trembling jaw, hands that came up without being asked, palms out, the universal language of surrender. "Please," she said. Her voice was small and shaky in a way that cost her nothing and bought her everything. "Please, I'm just a nurse. I don't know anything about..." "Floor," he said, "with the others." Okay, I'm going, I just..." She let her hands drop slightly, let her body language go uncertain and loose, the kind of uncoordinated vulnerability that made armed men impatient. Is it okay if I just move this cart because if someone..." "I said floor," he snapped, stepping forward. She went to her knees. She let her hands go to the floor. She lowered her head. He moved past her. He was already thinking about the next room. She was already behind him in his mental map, filed under irrelevant. Good. She lifted her head slightly. She watched him move away. She watched the angle of his shoulders, the way he held the weapon, the way he scanned the rooms as he passed them. She noted which direction the other footsteps were coming from, updated her count, updated her map. 4 men, all moving inward toward the trauma bays, toward the man with the snake tattoo. She looked at the supply cart one more time. She looked at the fire extinguisher on the wall. She looked at the corridor stretching out behind the gunman's retreating back. Then she stood up, not fast, not dramatic, just up, the way you stand up when you've made a decision, and the decision is done, and there's no point spending another second in the position of someone who hasn't made it yet. She moved to the supply cart. She moved with purpose and absolute quiet, pulling the oxygen canister from its bracket with both hands, keeping the motion smooth and controlled. She picked up a sealed scalpel pack and slid it into the pocket of her scrubs. She pulled 2 feet of IV tubing loose and coiled it around her left hand. She did all of this in under 40 seconds. Then she moved to the edge of the supply corridor and looked around the corner toward the nurse's station. 3 of the 4 gunmen were visible from her position. The 4th, she calculated, had gone toward the main trauma bays where Dr. Webb was still working. That was the critical point. That was where everything was going to happen first. Patricia Reyes was on the floor near the nurse's station, along with Danny Chen and 2 other nurses whose names Khloe was still learning. They were all face down with their hands visible. Danny was shaking. Patricia was not. Patricia's eyes were open. And when those eyes tracked across the corridor and found Khloe standing at the supply corridor entrance with an oxygen canister in her hands and absolutely no expression of fear on her face, something happened in Patricia Reyes that was going to take a long time to fully process. Her eyes went wide, not with fear, with recognition. The sudden, lurching recognition that she had spent 6 weeks working beside someone and had not seen them at all. Khloe met her eyes for exactly 1 second. She moved 2 fingers in a small, controlled gesture that meant, stay down and don't react. Then she looked away, back toward the trauma bays. Patricia stared at the floor. The nearest gunman had his back partially turned, watching the corridor toward the main entrance. His partner was approximately 30 feet away, covering the east wing. The 3rd man, the one who had told Patricia to get down, the one with the calm, accented voice, was moving toward Trauma Bay 2. He was going to reach it in about 45 seconds. Dr. Webb was in there. So was a critically injured man with snake tattoos and cartel numbers on his arm, connected to machines that were the only things keeping him alive right now. And whoever these men were, whatever their orders, taking their man out of that room in his current state meant one of 2 things. Either they didn't care whether he survived the extraction, or they didn't plan on extracting him at all. She thought about the shots to the ceiling. 3 shots, not 4. 1 per person, which would have been the efficient choice. 3 shots meant demonstration, not elimination. So they wanted him alive. That meant they needed the machines. That meant they needed the room. That meant Dr. Webb was in the worst possible position right now because he was standing between the cartel and the one thing the cartel needed. And the cartel had 4 armed men and he had a surgical team. Khloe moved. She went along the corridor wall, fast and low, the oxygen canister tucked against her body to keep it from catching the light. She passed the break room. She passed the equipment storage closet. She reached the corner that turned toward the trauma bay corridor, and she stopped, pressing her back to the wall, listening. She heard the calm voice say something in Spanish that she understood completely, and that told her, in 3 short sentences, everything she needed to know about why they were here and what they were willing to do. She closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. She thought about the teenage boy with the broken collarbone and the cracked phone. She thought about Patricia on the floor. She thought about Danny, still shaking. She thought about the 6 weeks she had spent being Khloe Adams, rookie nurse, clumsy and nervous and ordinary and forgettable. And she thought about how easy it was to become a person if you just committed to it, if you just showed up every day and cared about the work and let people underestimate you and treated the whole thing as though it were real. It had been real. That was the thing nobody would understand later when they tried to make sense of it. She had not been pretending to be a nurse. She was a nurse. She had studied for it and trained for it and come here because she wanted it. She wanted a life that was quiet and skilled and useful in a way that didn't require anyone to die. She had wanted to be done with the other thing. The other thing had other ideas. She opened her eyes. She looked at the oxygen canister in her hands. She looked at the sealed scalpel in her pocket. She thought about the layout of Trauma Bay 2, the position of the equipment, the placement of the door, the distance between the door and where Webb would be standing. Captain Sophia Jennett had not disappeared. She had just been waiting. She had been waiting for 6 quiet, ordinary weeks. And now she stopped waiting. She came around the corner. She moved like she was supposed to be there, because she was. She moved like someone with a task and a destination, and no time for hesitation. Because that was exactly what she was. She closed the distance to the trauma bay in 8 steps, and by the time the gunman with the calm voice registered that someone was behind him, she was already in his peripheral vision, and she was already doing the thing she had planned to do. The thing that had taken her exactly 3 seconds to decide on while she was standing at the supply cart staring at an oxygen canister. She cracked the valve on the canister hard and fast, releasing a burst of high-pressure oxygen directly at his face. And in the half-second that he reflexively flinched and turned toward the sensation, she drove the base of the canister into the side of his knee with the precise, mechanical efficiency of someone who had been trained to end confrontations before they became fights. He went down, not unconscious, but down, and the gun skittered away from his hand when he hit the floor. And in the time it took him to process what had happened and start reaching for it again, she had it in her hand, and she had taken 3 steps back, and she was standing between him and the trauma bay door with the weapon pointed at him, and her breathing absolutely even. Dr. Webb appeared in the doorway of Trauma Bay 2. He stared at her. She did not look at him. "Don't," she said to the man on the floor. Her voice had changed. Gone was the small, shaky uncertainty of the rookie nurse who couldn't read a decimal point. What replaced it was something different, older, quieter, the voice of someone who had given this instruction before and had not been argued with and had no expectation of being argued with now. The man on the floor looked up at her. He was reassessing. She could see it in his eyes, the rapid recalibration of everything he had thought he knew about this room and the people in it. He had expected doctors. He had expected nurses. He had expected compliance and fear and the particular helplessness of civilians faced with organized violence. He had not expected her. "Dr. Webb," she said, still not looking at him, "get back inside and lock that door." "Who? What?" Webb's voice was barely above a whisper. "Now, please. Still even, still quiet. And whatever you do not let that man's blood pressure drop below 60. Webb disappeared back into the room. She heard the lock click. The man on the floor was breathing hard, but his hand had stopped moving toward where the gun had been. He was watching her with the careful attention of someone who had decided to get more information before trying anything. That was fine. She needed a minute anyway. 3 more men in the building, 1 at the main entrance, 1 in the east corridor covering the staff. 1 somewhere she hadn't tracked yet, which bothered her in a specific, focused way. She had the gun. She had the element of surprise on at least 1 or 2 of them. She had medical knowledge that she was already turning into tactical options in the back of her mind, cataloging the drugs in the supply room, the equipment in the corridors, the particular vulnerabilities of a building full of things that were designed to help people, but could, in the right circumstances, do the opposite. She looked down at the man on the floor. "What's your name?" she asked. He stared at her. "I don't need your whole biography," she said. "Just your name." A long silence. "Marco," he finally said. "Marco, the man in that room. Why is he important enough to send 4 men in the middle of the night?" Marco's expression shifted into something that might have been almost respectful if it weren't still mostly furious. "You don't know what you're in," he said. "I know exactly what I'm in," she said. "I want to know the specifics." Another silence. She heard footsteps at the far end of the corridor, moving this way. Moving with the careful, spread-out coordination of someone who had realized something had gone wrong and was coming to investigate without making noise. Her time for questions was running out. "Marco," she said. He looked at her. "I'm going to need you to decide something in the next about 4 seconds," she said. "And I want you to think carefully, because the men coming this way right now don't know what happened here. They don't know you're down. They don't know who I am, which means that right now, you and I are the only 2 people in this building who know how that fight went. And what you do in the next 4 seconds determines what the next 4 hours look like for everyone in this hospital." She paused. "Including you." The footsteps were getting closer. Marco stared up at her from the floor, his knee throbbing, his weapon gone. The certainty that had walked him into this hospital 40 minutes ago, completely dismantled by a woman in blue scrubs who smelled like antiseptic and moved like a ghost. He said something. She nodded, and then she moved. Marco said one word, just one, and that word was Ramos. She filed it away without reacting. Her face gave him nothing. Her eyes gave him less. She looked at him the way a surgeon looks at a problem, not with emotion, but with the kind of focused, bloodless attention that is somehow more frightening than anger, because it means the person looking at you has already moved past the part where you matter emotionally and arrived at the part where you are simply a variable. "Stay quiet," she told him. "Don't move that knee. You'll make it worse." "You broke my knee," he said, and there was almost something bewildered in his voice, like a man who had walked into a building he thought he knew and found every room in the wrong place. "I didn't break it. I hyperextended the lateral ligament. You'll walk in 6 weeks if you ice it and stay off it. Which you will, because you're going to stay exactly where you are." She looked down the corridor one more time. "And Marco, if you shout, if you make a single sound that brings your friends this way before I'm ready, I will come back here, and the second time will not be as gentle as the first. Do you understand me?" He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded. She believed him. Not because she trusted him, because she had looked in his eyes and seen the calculation there. The same calculation she would have made in his position. The one that said, this woman is a known quantity now. And the known quantity is dangerous, and the smart move is to wait and see. Smart men waited. She moved. 2:21 a.m. The corridor outside Trauma Bay 2 had 3 branches. She took the one that curved back toward the east wing, because that was where she had last heard the second gunman's footsteps, and because the east wing had something she needed. She moved fast and low, keeping to the side of the hallway, her borrowed Glock held down and close to her body, the way she had been taught in a facility that no longer officially existed by instructors whose names had been redacted from every document they had ever appeared in. She heard Danny before she saw him. "Please." His voice was coming from around the next corner, thin and frightened, and trying very hard not to crack. "Please, man, I'm just a nurse. I don't know anything. I swear to God I don't know anything. I just work here." "Shut up." The gunman's voice was younger than she expected, barely out of his teens by the sound of it. Young and frightened in a way he was masking with aggression, which made him more dangerous than a calm professional. Not less. Frightened people with guns made decisions from panic. Panic was unpredictable. She came around the corner fast. The scene assembled itself in front of her in less than a second. Danny Chen on the floor, hands behind his head, his whole body shaking. 3 other nurses, 2 of them she recognized, face down alongside him. The gunman standing over them with his weapon aimed at the floor, his posture tight and jerky, his head swiveling every few seconds toward the corridor behind him, like he was waiting for a signal that wasn't coming. He heard her. He spun. She was already inside his arm. The move was something that had no name she had ever been given, just a sequence that had been drilled into her body until it lived there the way breathing lived there. And it took less than 2 seconds and ended with the gunman's weapon in her left hand and the gunman himself stumbling backward into the wall with the expression of a person whose entire understanding of the last 30 seconds needed to be rebuilt from scratch. He was young, 19, maybe 20. Under the balaclava, his eyes were wide and young and terrified. "Don't," she said, same voice she had used with Marco. Even, quiet, final. He didn't. Danny Chen lifted his head from the floor and looked at her. He opened his mouth. She shook her head once, sharply, and he closed it. She saw him working through it in real time. The same recalibration Patricia had gone through. The sudden lurching revision of every assumption he had made about the woman he had teased about supply closets and decimal points for 6 weeks. She looked at the other nurses. They were all watching her now, faces up from the floor, eyes wide. "Patricia," she said without raising her voice. Here, Patricia's voice came from around the next corner, and the steadiness in it was something Khloe hadn't expected, even though she should have. 22 years of night shifts. The woman was built from crisis. "Can you move?" "I've been waiting for you to ask that for the last 4 minutes." Khloe almost smiled. She didn't quite. "Come around the corner, slowly. Bring whoever's with you." Patricia appeared a moment later, moving in a low crouch that looked slightly ridiculous and absolutely competent at the same time. 2 other nurses behind her. She looked at Khloe. She looked at the 2 disarmed gunmen, one on the floor with a damaged knee around the corner, and one standing against the wall with the expression of a man who had been defused like a bomb. She looked at the 2 weapons in Khloe's hands. She said, "Who are you?" "Right now I'm the charge on this situation," Khloe said, "which means I need you to listen to me the way I've been listening to you for 6 weeks. Can you do that?" Patricia stared at her. Something moved across her face that was going to take days to fully articulate. Then she squared her shoulders and she nodded. "Good." Khloe handed her one of the weapons, grip first. Patricia took it. Her hands were steady. "You know how to use that?" "My father was a Marine." "Good enough. You're covering this corridor. Nobody moves who isn't staff. If this one," she gestured to the young gunman against the wall, "makes a decision, you remind him what his options are." "With pleasure," Patricia said, and the young gunman looked at the charge nurse's expression and made the very wise decision to stay exactly where he was. 2:26 a.m. That left 2. One at the main entrance, which was the position she understood least, because it was the one she had the least visibility on. One unaccounted for, which was the one that kept pulling at the back of her mind like a loose thread. She had tracked 4 voices from the beginning. She had neutralized 2. The entrance gunman she could roughly position from the sound. The 4th had either moved somewhere she hadn't anticipated or was holding a position she hadn't mapped yet. She did not like unknowns. She moved toward the main corridor. She passed the break room. She passed the supply closet she had once walked into by mistake. She passed the room where the teenage boy with the broken collarbone had been, and she glanced in without stopping. He was still there, sitting up in the bed with his cracked phone clutched to his chest, staring at the door with the particular deer-in-headlights stillness of someone who had heard everything and understood most of it and was making a determined effort to be invisible. Their eyes met. She held up a hand, palm flat. "Stay." He nodded so fast it was almost a full-body movement. She kept moving. The main corridor was long and straight, and from the end of it you could see the nurse's station in the main entrance and the doors to the waiting room. She pressed herself to the wall and looked around the corner. The entrance gunman was exactly where she thought he was. Big, broad-shouldered, standing with his back to the automatic doors and his weapon at a low ready, scanning the corridor with the calm rotation of someone who had been stationed and was doing the job right. He was the most disciplined of the four. She could see it in the way he held himself. This one had real training. That made him more dangerous than the others. It also made him more predictable. Trained men made trained choices. She knew the playbook because she had written chapters of it. She pulled back around the corner. She needed a way to separate him from his field of vision without a direct approach down a straight corridor with no cover. She looked at the wall to her right. She looked at the supply cart that one of the nurses had left in the corridor during the initial chaos, still sitting exactly where it had been abandoned, stacked with equipment that had been going somewhere important before everything stopped. On the bottom shelf of that cart was a blood pressure monitor. On the second shelf was a portable cardiac reader that beeped when it was turned on. On the top shelf was a glass specimen jar and a stainless steel tray. She looked at these things. She made a decision. She moved to the cart without making a sound. She picked up the stainless steel tray. She felt the weight of it. She looked back around the corner at the entrance gunman's position. She looked at the angle. She looked at the corridor branch that opened up on the far side of the nurse's station, the one that led toward the radiology wing and was currently empty and dark. She threw the tray. It wasn't meant to hit anything. It was meant to make noise in exactly the right place at exactly the right time. And it did both. The clatter of stainless steel on linoleum in the radiology corridor was sharp and sudden and unmistakable. And the entrance gunman moved toward it the way trained men moved, fast and controlled, and in exactly the direction she needed him to move. She was behind him before he had covered 10 feet. She had been trained to do this quietly, and she did it quietly. And 30 seconds later, the entrance was unguarded, and the fourth and final weapon was in her hands, and the entrance gunman was sitting on the floor with his wrists secured with IV tubing in a knot that she had been taught by a woman in a black site in Eastern Europe who had described it as a love language. 3 down, 1 left, the unknown one. 2:31 a.m. She stood in the middle of the main corridor, and she thought very hard and very fast. 4 men had come in. She had accounted for 3 voices immediately after the entry. The 4th voice she had heard later, faintly, in a direction she hadn't been able to fully fix, because at that point she had still been at the supply cart playing frightened, and her situational awareness had been deliberately narrowed to avoid giving herself away. She thought about what Marco had said. Ramos. She thought about the man in Trauma Bay 2. She thought about Dr. Webb and the locked door. And then she thought about something she hadn't thought about yet, something that had been sitting at the edge of her mind since the moment she had seen the tattoos. And the reason she hadn't let herself think about it fully was because the implication of it was significant enough that she had needed to clear the rest of the board first before she could afford to sit with it. The man in Trauma Bay 2 was not just any cartel member. The numbers on his forearm were a ranking identifier. She knew that system. She knew it because she had spent 14 months embedded in a task force that had spent those 14 months learning everything there was to learn about a specific organization that operated out of 3 countries and had its fingers in infrastructure that most people didn't know could be bought. She had been Captain Sophia Jeanette then. She had been one of 6 people in a room in a federal building in Virginia when they had gone through the photographs and the identification protocols and the numbers. The man in Trauma Bay 2 was not a foot soldier. He was a logistics coordinator, 3rd tier of the organization, which meant the people who had come for him were not just a standard retrieval team. They were insurance, which meant there was a protocol, and the protocol for a 3rd tier capture, if retrieval was compromised, was not just extraction, it was sanitation, which meant the 4th man was not here to help get the man in Trauma Bay 2 out of the hospital. He was here to make sure the man in Trauma Bay 2 did not leave the hospital alive. She was already moving before she finished the thought. She ran. Not quiet anymore, no more careful and controlled. She ran down the main corridor and around the corner and down the Trauma Bay hallway and she hit the door of Trauma Bay 2 with the flat of her hand and said, "Webb, open this door. Open it now." She heard something on the other side of the door that stopped her blood cold. Glass breaking. Then silence. Then Dr. Webb's voice, very controlled and very frightened. "There's someone in here." She tried the handle. Locked from the inside, which meant Webb had engaged the secondary bolt, which meant she couldn't. She stepped back. She looked at the door frame. She looked at the hinge side. She looked at the width of the corridor and the angle and the physics of a door that had been designed for patient privacy and not for tactical entry. She took 2 steps back. She lowered her shoulder. She went through the door. 2:34 a.m. The room was chaos, but it was survivable chaos, which was the only kind that mattered. Dr. Webb was backed against the far wall with both hands raised. A nurse she didn't know well, a young woman named Soo Jin, who had graduated 6 months before Khloe, and who moved around the hospital with a quiet competence that Khloe had noticed and respected, was standing in front of the patient's bed with her arms spread like she was physically blocking access to it. The 4th man was between them and the door. He was different from the others, older, calmer. He wore no balaclava. He had made no effort to hide his face, and the reason for that was something she understood immediately, and that made the temperature in the room feel like it dropped 15 degrees. He had not covered his face because he had not planned on anyone in this room surviving to describe him. He looked at her. She looked at him. He held a weapon. She held a weapon. For 3 full seconds, nobody spoke. Then he said, in English with barely any accent at all, "Captain Jennett," and the floor shifted. Not literally, but inside her chest, inside the carefully maintained architecture of the last 6 weeks, something tilted, because he knew her name. Not Khloe Adams, the other name. The name that was supposed to be buried under 6 layers of federal paperwork and 2 years of deliberate, methodical disappearance. "You have the wrong person," she said. Her voice held. "No," he said. "I really don't." He smiled. Not the bored smile of the man who had held the old nurse against the wall. This was something more private, more directed. "They told us there was a possibility you were here. We didn't believe it. Seemed too convenient." He tilted his head slightly. "And then Marco went quiet, and then Rios went quiet, and then I started thinking that maybe convenient was exactly the right word." Webb was looking at her. She didn't look back at him. "Put the weapon down," she said. "After you. That's not how this works. Then we have a problem." He shifted slightly, not threatening yet, just repositioning, and she tracked the movement and understood it. He was angling toward the patient on the bed, not toward the door. He didn't want the door. He wanted the man on the table. "Don't," she said. "This man has information that will cause significant problems for a significant number of people," he said. "You understand how this works. You were in the business. The information dies with him. That's clean. That's correct. That's how it's supposed to end. He's a patient. He's a liability." "He's my patient," Soo Jin said. Her voice was shaking, but her arms were still spread, and she had not moved from in front of the bed. And Khloe felt something sharp and fierce move through her chest at that. At the sight of a 25-year-old nurse with no tactical training and no weapons standing between a cartel assassin and an unconscious man, because that was what she believed you were supposed to do. The 4th man looked at Soo Jin with the expression of someone encountering an obstacle they had not scheduled for. Khloe moved. She went left, hard and fast, putting herself between him and Soo Jin in the bed, and the angle of engagement changed completely in the half-second it took her to cross the room, and she saw him recalculate, and she saw the moment he decided to change approach, and she was ready for that too. The fight was short. Later, Dr. Webb would struggle to describe it in a way that felt honest, because the honest description was that it had looked like something from a world he had no reference for. 2 people with professional-level training in violence, working through a problem together with their bodies, at a speed that made his medical training feel quaint. He would say it lasted maybe 15 seconds. It lasted closer to 8. It ended with Khloe on her feet and the fourth man on the floor. Not unconscious, but finished. Arm at an angle it was not supposed to be at. Weapon gone. The careful, ageless, professional calm completely evacuated from his face, replaced with the raw, animal expression of someone who has just learned something they cannot unknow. She stood over him, breathing evenly. Webb said, "Oh my God." Sujin slowly lowered her arms. She looked at Khloe, then she looked at the man on the floor. Then she looked at the monitors connected to the patient on the bed, running through her checks with the automatic reflex of someone whose professional instincts ran deeper than terror. "He's stable," she said. Her voice was still shaking. Blood pressure's holding. "Good," Khloe said. "Keep it that way." She looked down at the man on the floor. He was looking up at her with that revised expression, the one she had seen on Marco's face and on the young gunman's face, the one that said everything he had walked in knowing had just been reclassified. "How did they find me?" she asked. Quiet, direct, no anger in it. He said nothing. "I'm not asking for me," she said. "I'm asking because if they found me, the people I worked with can be found. And those people have families. So I'm asking again, how did they find me?" His jaw tightened. She put it in a compartment and closed the door on it because there was no room for it right now. Because right now there were still 4 men in this building who needed securing, and a hospital full of people who needed to get home, and a man on a table who needed to stay alive long enough to have a conversation with people who were equipped to have it. "Thank you," she said. He looked almost surprised that she meant it. 2:39 a.m. She came back out into the trauma corridor, and she stood there for a moment in the particular silence of a building that has just finished being violent and hasn't yet figured out what to do with the quiet. Somewhere in the hospital, a monitor was beeping steadily. Somewhere, a door she hadn't closed all the way was moving on its hinges in the recycled air of the ventilation system. Patricia appeared at the end of the corridor. She walked toward Khloe with the deliberate, measured pace of a woman who had decided to approach this carefully and wasn't going to be rushed about it. She still had the weapon Khloe had given her, held down at her side, no longer pointed at anything. Her expression was the one she used when she was doing paperwork that didn't add up and was going to keep at it until it did. She stopped in front of Khloe. "So," she said. "So," Khloe said. "The supply closet thing, was that real?" Khloe looked at her. "Yes, I genuinely walked into the supply closet." Patricia stared at her. "That's the part that bothers me most about this whole night," she said. Then she took a breath. "What do we do now?" "Now we lock this building down," Khloe said. "Every exit, every entrance. We move all patients away from the trauma bays. We keep the 4 of them separated and contained. We wake every staff member who isn't already awake, and we give them jobs to do, because people with jobs don't panic." She paused. "And then we call it in." "Call who?" "Someone who has been looking for the man in Trauma Bay 2 for a very long time," she said, "and who is going to have a lot of questions about how he ended up here, and how this ended up here, and who I am." Patricia looked at her for a long moment. "Who are you?" she asked, genuinely. No challenge in it, just the honest question. Khloe Adams looked at Patricia Reyes, charge nurse, 22 years of night shifts, the woman who had been exasperated with her since day one and had expected nothing from her and had gone to the floor tonight without breaking and had taken a weapon grip first without flinching. She thought about how to answer that. "Right now," she finally said, "I'm the nurse on this floor, and we have patients to look after." Patricia held her gaze for 3 full seconds. Then she nodded once, the way you nodded at something that was not the full answer, but was enough for the moment. "All right," she said. "Danny," she raised her voice down the corridor, "get off the floor, stop crying and go check vitals in rooms 4 through 7. We're still a hospital." Danny Chen's voice floated back from around the corner, muffled and slightly wet. I wasn't crying. You were absolutely crying. I was having a respiratory response to stress. Then have it on your feet and get moving. Khloe listened to them, to the familiar rhythm of it, the charge nurse and the quick-tongued younger nurse going back and forth in the dark of a corridor that had just been a battlefield and was now, minute by minute, becoming a hospital again. She thought about the list that had been sold 6 weeks ago. She thought about the name Ramos. She thought about the fourth man's eyes when he had looked up at her from the floor and said, someone inside, your side. She thought about all the things she had to do before sunrise. Then she picked up a chart from the nurse's station because it needed to be done, and she started doing it. The chart didn't last long. She had made it through 2 patient notes when her phone buzzed against the nurse's station counter. A number she didn't recognize, which meant it was exactly the number she had been expecting. She looked at it for 1 full ring, then she picked up. You took longer than I thought, she said. A pause on the other end, then a voice she hadn't heard in 2 years, dry and unhurried, and carrying the particular weight of a man who had spent his career in rooms where every word cost something. We had to confirm the source before we moved. You know how it works. I know how it works, she said. How far out are you? 18 minutes, maybe 15 if your traffic cooperates. My traffic is 4 secured cartel members and 1 unstable third-tier logistics coordinator on a table in Trauma Bay 2, she said. So cooperate fast. Another pause. Are you hurt? She thought about that. She did a quick internal inventory, the way she had been taught, moving through systems the way she moved through a patient assessment. Nothing structural. A bruise forming on her left forearm from the entry in Trauma Bay 2. A pulled muscle somewhere in her right shoulder that she was going to feel tomorrow and ignore anyway. No, she said. Khloe. I'm not hurt, Cole. Special Agent Marcus Cole, who had run her handler relationship for the last 3 years of her service, and who had signed off on her exit, and who had personally constructed the Khloe Adams identity with the care of someone building a house he intended to live in, said nothing for a moment. Then, we need to talk about the leak. I know. When I get there. I'll be here, she said. I'm not going anywhere. She hung up. 2:44 a.m. Patricia appeared at her elbow with the particular timing she had, that charge nurse instinct for showing up at the exact moment she was needed without being summoned. She set a cup of coffee on the counter next to the chart. Black, no sugar. She had been watching, apparently. Federal? Patricia asked. Close enough. How long? 15 minutes. Patricia nodded. She looked down the corridor in both directions, doing the same assessment Khloe did. That inventory of space and personnel and variables that good charge nurses developed, and that was, Khloe had always thought, not that different from tactical thinking, just applied to different problems. The young one, Patricia said, the one in the East Corridor, he's scared. He should be. No, I mean, Patricia paused, choosing her words with unusual care. He's not scared the way the others are scared. He's scared like a kid who made a wrong turn a long time ago and kept going because he didn't know how to stop. She looked at Khloe sideways. I thought you should know that. Khloe looked at her. At the woman who had spent 6 weeks being annoyed with her and had spent the last 40 minutes being something else entirely. Thank you, she said. Don't read too much into it. I'm still putting you on bedpan rotation next week. Khloe picked up the coffee. Fair enough. She drank it standing up, and she thought about the young gunman, and she thought about Marco, and she thought about the fourth man, and his ageless face, and his unaccented English, and the way he had said the list was sold 6 weeks ago with the flat delivery of someone reporting weather. She thought about who on her former team had access to that list. She counted faces. She counted names. She let the math run and did not flinch from where it led. Someone she knew. Someone she had trusted. The coffee was hot enough to hurt slightly. She drank it anyway. 2:47 a.m. Danny Chen came back from checking vitals in rooms 4 through 7, moving with the careful energy of someone who had been frightened out of their habits and was reconstructing them one action at a time. He stopped at the nurse's station. He looked at Khloe. He opened his mouth. He closed it. He opened it again. "The supply closet thing," he said. "Danny, I just want to understand later. Was anything real? Like, were you actually nervous about the decimal points? Because that seemed very real." She looked at him. "Yes, I was nervous about the decimal points. I've been a nurse for 6 weeks and medication math genuinely makes me anxious. Those two things can both be true." Danny stared at her. Then he looked at the weapon she had set on the counter beside the chart, and then back at her face. "That is somehow the most unsettling thing that has happened tonight," he said. "Go check room 8, she said. He went. The next 10 minutes were the particular kind of tense that had no visible action in it, the tension of waiting and holding and maintaining, which Khloe had always found harder than the kind with movement in it. Movement gave you something to put your focus into. Waiting gave it nowhere to go except inward. And inward was a place that had been getting complicated since the fourth man had said Captain Jennett, and the floor had tilted. She kept busy. She checked on the secured cartel members, moving through them one at a time, not to be kind, but to be accurate, to assess their status, their restraints, their threat level. Marco was still where she had left him, sitting with his back against the wall, his damaged knee stretched out in front of him. He watched her approach without speaking. "How is it?" she asked. "How is what?" "The knee." A pause. "It hurts." "Of course it hurts. Do you want something for it?" He looked at her like she had asked the question in a language he didn't speak. "You're offering me painkillers." "I'm a nurse," she said. "You're injured. Those are the two relevant facts." He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in his face, not softness exactly, more like the adjustment a person makes when they encounter something that doesn't fit the category they put it in and have to build a new category from scratch. "No," he said finally. "Keep it. I need to stay clear." She nodded. She stood up. "The man in there," Marco said. "Ramos." She paused. "He's not what you think he is," Marco said. "He's not just a number on a list." "Tell me." "He has a daughter, 12 years old. She's in federal protection right now because he put her there. He turned himself in 6 weeks ago. Gave information to your people in exchange for her safety." Marco's jaw tightened. "The men who sent us tonight don't know that yet, but when they find out he talked, they'll go for the daughter." The weight of it landed on her like something physical. She stayed still. She didn't let it show on her face, but her mind was already moving, already rerouting, already revising the architecture of what she thought this night was about. "How do you know that?" she asked. "Because I drove him to the federal building," Marco said. 6 weeks ago. I'm the reason he's here." He looked at the floor. "I thought I was doing the right thing. Now I don't know what I did." 2:53 a.m. She walked back to the nurse's station fast. She picked up her phone. She called Cole back without waiting for him to land. He picked up on the second ring. "We're 12 minutes out." "There's a child," she said. "Ramos's daughter, federal protection, 12 years old. If there's a fourth team and they find out Ramos talked." "I know about the daughter," Cole said, and something in his voice had shifted. Tighter, more controlled. The voice he used when a situation was actively changing under his hands. "We moved her 2 hours ago." 2 hours ago, she repeated. "You moved her 2 hours ago, before this started." "We got a tip." "From who?" A pause that lasted exactly long enough to mean something. "Cole," she said. "We'll talk when I get there. We'll talk now. You got a tip 2 hours ago and you didn't call me." "We didn't know you were involved." "You knew exactly where I was. You've known where I was for 6 weeks because you built the place I was standing in. So don't tell me you didn't know." Her voice was still level. She kept it level with the same effort she kept her breathing level in the middle of a physical confrontation. The deliberate, muscular effort of control. You knew this was coming, and you let it come. Silence on the line. 8 minutes, Cole said. I'll explain everything. She put the phone down. She stood at the nurse's station in the humming fluorescent light, and she thought about 6 weeks of being Khloe Adams. She thought about who had placed her at Mercy West, specifically, in the same hospital where a man named Ramos would eventually be brought in with 3 gunshot wounds. She thought about how specific that was, how arranged. She thought about the 4th man who had known her name. She thought about the list sold 6 weeks ago. She picked up the chart again, not because it needed doing right now, because her hands needed something to hold. Soo-jin came out of trauma bay 2, pulling off a pair of gloves, moving with the efficient exhaustion of someone who had been running on adrenaline for 40 minutes and could feel it starting to thin. She stopped at the nurse's station. She looked at Khloe. He's stable, she said. Pressure's actually improving. Good. Soo-jin looked at her hands, then at Khloe's face. I didn't know you could do that, she said. Nobody did. Do you? She stopped, started again. Do you feel okay? Like, are you okay? Personally? Khloe looked at her, at the genuine direct care in it, the question asked without agenda, the way Soo-jin asked all her questions, as though the answer mattered more than what she was supposed to do with it. I'm working on it, Khloe said. Soo-jin nodded like that was a complete answer. Maybe it was. 3:01 a.m. The federal vehicles arrived without sirens, which was how Khloe had asked for it when she called it in, because sirens at 3 a.m. turned a contained situation into a news event. 4 vehicles, black, nondescript, pulling into the ambulance bay with the practiced quiet of teams that had done this before. She watched them from the window at the end of the east corridor, counting figures, assessing posture, doing what she always did. Cole was the 3rd one out. She recognized him by the way he moved before she could see his face clearly. That particular walk of his, measured and slightly heavy, the walk of a man carrying more information than he showed. He was taller than she remembered, or maybe she had just spent 6 weeks around people who moved differently. He had more gray at his temples than 2 years ago. His eyes when he found her across the ambulance bay were the same, the gray-brown combination that had always looked to her like weather about to change. He stopped 2 feet from her. You look like a nurse, he said. I am a nurse, she said. Khloe, talk, she said. He talked. It took 6 minutes, and it was worse than she had thought in some ways, and better in others, which was usually how truth worked when you finally got the unedited version of it. The short version was this. Cole had known for 3 weeks that Mercy West was going to be a target. He had known because the same person who had sold the list had also, in what he described as a crisis of conscience, walked back into a federal building and given them a partial playbook. The partial playbook had not included Khloe's placement, which meant either it wasn't known or it was being deliberately withheld. Cole had moved up his timeline when the crisis of conscience asset had gone quiet 48 hours ago, the particular quiet that meant something had found them. You used me as bait, Khloe said when he finished. I used the situation, he said. I knew you could handle it. You knew I could handle it, she repeated. You neutralized 4 trained operatives with a scalpel and an oxygen canister. That is not the point, and you know it. He looked at her. He had the decency to look like a man who knew he had done something that was justifiable and wrong at the same time, and was sitting with that. The asset who went quiet, he said. We found them this morning, before we got here. She waited. It was Torres, he said. Lieutenant Anna Torres, 14-year veteran, the woman who had taught Khloe the IV tubing knot in a black site in Eastern Europe and called it a love language. The woman whose photograph was on a wall in a federal office somewhere, along with 5 others from the task force. Khloe was quiet for a moment. Is she alive? She asked. Yes, critical, but alive. We think she's the one who sold the list originally and then tried to fix it when she understood what she'd set in motion. She has a daughter, Khloe said. 8 years old. I know. So she sold the list because someone threatened her daughter and then blew her own cover trying to walk it back. Cole said nothing. And you let me stand in the middle of this building for 6 weeks, she said, knowing all of that. I didn't know all of it 6 weeks ago. When did you know enough? A pause. Cole. 4 days ago, he said. I knew enough 4 days ago. The ambulance bay was quiet except for the sound of his agents moving inside the building. The efficient, controlled sounds of professionals doing their jobs. She listened to them work. She thought about Torres. She thought about Torres's daughter. She thought about Ramos's daughter moved to safety 2 hours before the shooting started. She thought about the teenage boy with the broken collarbone and the cracked phone, and how she had told him the hard part was over. The informant, she said. The one who went back in. Torres. Yes. She named someone before she went quiet. That's how you knew to move the girl. Cole looked at her steadily. Yes. Who did she name? Another pause. The worst kind of pause. The kind that meant the name was one she was going to recognize. Khloe, he said. Say it. Director Halverson, he said. She heard it. She absorbed it. She let the full implication of it move through her like something cold and deliberate. Director Halverson, who had been the operational authority over her task force for 3 years, who had signed every classified document she had ever touched, who had shaken her hand when she walked out of the federal building 2 years ago and told her she had served with distinction. He ran the operation tonight, she said, not a question. We believe so, yes. He knew I was here. He placed you here, Cole said quietly. The Khloe Adams placement wasn't ours. We thought it was yours, personal choice. Mercy West was just a hospital, a clean record, easy placement for a new identity. We didn't connect it until Torres gave us the building name. She stood in the ambulance bay and she breathed. She did the thing she always did in the moment when the information was too large for the immediate moment. She put it somewhere, put it in a container, sealed the container, set it down carefully beside her feet where she could see it without being inside it. Halverson knows the operation failed, she said. Yes. Which means he knows I'm here. Confirm now. Yes. Which means the next move is his. That's why we need to move fast, Cole said. We need to get you. I'm not going anywhere, she said. He stopped. The staff in that building, she said, Patricia Reyes and Danny Chen and Sujin Park and a teenage boy with a broken collarbone who doesn't know any of this is connected to anything. They're in that building because of me, because Halverson put me there and used them as furniture in a setup he built around me. Her voice was level, but something beneath it was not. Something that was not anger exactly, but was related to it. The foundational version of it. The one that didn't burn hot, but burned steady. I'm not walking out until every one of them is safe and accounted for. Cole looked at her for a long moment. Halverson has resources, he said. So do I, she said. I have a building I know better than anyone on his team. I have staff who have just spent 40 minutes learning that they're harder than they thought they were. And I have you. She looked at him directly. Tell me you're still someone I can trust. He held her gaze. He didn't look away. Yes, he said. Then let's work the problem. 3:09 a.m. They went back inside together. Cole's team had already begun the process of separating and documenting the 4 secured cartel members, working with the calm precision of people who had done this in worse places. Khloe watched them process Marco and thought about what he had said about Ramos and the daughter in the federal building 6 weeks ago. She thought about the decisions that had led him to the floor of a hospital corridor with a hyperextended knee, and she thought about the decisions that had led her to the nurse's station of the same hospital with a stolen weapon and a cover identity that had just been burned. Patricia was waiting at the nurse's station with the expression she used when her entire understanding of a situation needed revising, and she was going to revise it on her own time, and nobody was going to rush her. Cole stopped when he saw her. He looked at her grip on the weapon she was still holding, the steadiness of it, the way her feet were planted. He looked at Khloe. "Charge nurse," Khloe said. 22 years. She's ours. Patricia raised an eyebrow at being described as ours, but she didn't correct it. Cole held out his hand. "Special Agent Marcus Cole. I understand you've had a complicated night." "I've had worse," Patricia said. "Once had a patient code 3 times in one shift, and the attending was in the bathroom for all 3. She looked at his badge. "Federal? What does Federal want with my hospital?" "We can explain everything," Cole said. "Later," Patricia said, in a tone that exactly mirrored the tone Khloe had used with Cole 20 minutes ago in the ambulance bay. And Cole blinked. Khloe said nothing. "Right now, I have 3 patients in critical condition and 2 in serious, and every nurse on this floor has been on the ground in the last hour. So you're going to have your people stay out of my way while I get this department back to functional, and then you can explain everything you want." Cole looked at Khloe. Khloe looked at the middle distance. She was not going to help him with this one. "Of course," Cole said. "Good." Patricia turned to Khloe. "Adams, rooms 1 through 3 need vital checks. Sujin has trauma bay 2. Danny is somewhere being dramatic about something." "I'll find him," Khloe said. She went. She found Danny in the supply corridor, sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, which was exactly where she had been when the night started. He had his knees pulled up and his head back and his eyes closed, and he was doing the controlled breathing exercise she had seen him use twice before. Once after a bad code, and once after a patient's family had screamed at him in the hallway. He heard her coming and opened his eyes. "I'm fine," he said immediately. "I know," she said. "I'm not going to fall apart." "I know that too." He looked at her, really looked at her, the way people looked when they were trying to reconcile 2 versions of something into one coherent image. "The supply closet," he said. "I need you to tell me that was real, that you genuinely didn't know it was a closet." "I genuinely didn't know it was a closet," she said. "I was 6 days in. Everything looked the same." "Okay," he said. He breathed out. "Okay, that helps somehow." "Good. Get up, Danny." He got up. He straightened his scrubs. He ran a hand through his hair, which had come completely loose from whatever product he used, and was doing something creative on the left side. He looked down the corridor and then back at her. "Are we in danger?" he asked. Straight. No performance around it. Just the question. She thought about Halverson. She thought about Cole's timeline and the failed operation and the next move. "There are people working on it," she said. "That's not a no," he said. "No," she said. "It's not." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded, the way people nodded when they accepted something they didn't like, because the alternative to accepting it was worse. "Okay," he said. "What do you need me to do?" "Right now," she said. "Rooms 4 through 7, vital checks." "That I can do," he said, and he went. 3:17 a.m. She was in the middle of room 2's vital check, a cardiac patient named Mr. Alderton, who had slept through the entire night's events with the magnificent obliviousness of a man on excellent sedation when Cole appeared in the doorway. She knew from his posture before he spoke. "Halverson has made contact," he said low. She finished writing the number. She set down the clipboard. "What kind of contact?" "He's offering a conversation, says he wants to explain, says there's a larger picture we don't have. He wants to know how much we know," she said. "Obviously, but there might also be something real in it. Torres's information was partial. There are pieces we don't have." She looked at Mr. Alderton, sleeping soundly, completely unaware that the person checking his blood pressure had been placed in this building by a man who was currently calling to see how badly his plan had failed. She thought about the larger picture Halverson claimed to have. She thought about what partial meant and what still missing meant. Tell him yes, she said. Cole hesitated. Khloe. Tell him yes, she said again. Set it for this building, our ground, our terms. You want to meet with the man who set you up, in the building he set you up in? I want to hear what he has to say, she said, and I want him to have to walk through this building to say it, past Patricia and Danny and Soo Jin, in every room where his plan came apart. She looked at Cole. Let him see what it looks like when you use the wrong people to build something. Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he said, you think there's something bigger. I think a director doesn't burn a 6-year asset and expose a deep placement and run a cartel retrieval operation on a hospital in the middle of Chicago, unless what he's protecting is worth more than all of that. And I want to know what that is, she paused. Don't you? Cole looked at the doorway, then at her, then at Mr. Alderton, still sleeping. I'll make the call, he said. She nodded. She picked up the clipboard again. She finished the vital check. She moved to room 3. The hospital was coming back to itself around her, slowly, the way hospitals always did after catastrophe, with a determined, almost stubborn return to function that was the particular character of places built to hold the worst moments of people's lives and keep working anyway. Monitors beeped, wheels rolled, voices moved through the corridors doing the ordinary work. She thought about what was coming. She thought about Halverson walking through these doors. She thought about Torres in a hospital bed somewhere, critical but alive. A woman who had made a terrible choice and then tried to unmake it, which didn't balance the ledger but meant something anyway. She thought about Marco's face when she had offered him painkillers. She thought about the young gunman's eyes. She thought about Ramos in Trauma Bay 2 and the daughter who was safe now in a place nobody would find her, and how none of these people had made clean decisions, and none of them had come through clean, and all of them were still here. She wrote down a number on a chart. She moved to room 4. Room 4 was empty. She stood in the doorway and looked at the made bed and the unplugged monitor and the chart clipped to the wall with nothing new written on it since 11 p.m. And she processed the small, ordinary fact of an empty room the way she processed everything right now, by checking it against what she knew and filing it under "not a problem" before moving on. She moved to room 5. Room 5 was not empty. Room 5 had Mrs. Eleanor Marsh, 73 years old, admitted 2 days ago for a cardiac arrhythmia that her cardiologist was managing with the careful attention of someone diffusing something that had already gone off once. Mrs. Marsh was awake. She was sitting up in the bed with her hands folded in her lap and her eyes on the door, and the expression of a woman who had been awake for the last hour and had decided to spend that time thinking rather than alarming anyone. She looked at Khloe when Khloe came through the door, and she said, "I heard everything." Khloe stopped. "Mrs. Marsh, I'm 73, not deaf, and these walls are thinner than the hospital pretends." She unfolded her hands and refolded them. "Are the people with the guns gone?" "Yes." "Are you all right?" Khloe blinked. "I'm checking on you." "I know what you're doing. I'm asking a different question." Mrs. Marsh looked at her with the steady, unhurried attention of someone who had spent 7 decades learning to read people and no longer needed much time to do it. "You sound different than you did yesterday, during the evening rounds." "Do I?" "Yesterday you sounded like someone being careful. Tonight you sound like someone who stopped having to be." She tilted her head slightly. "Which one is the real you?" Khloe looked at the woman in the bed. She thought about how to answer that. She thought about what she had said to Patricia, about being both things, about the decimal points being real and the rest of it being real too. "Both," she finally said. "I think both of them are real." Mrs. Marsh considered this. "That sounds exhausting," she said. "It is," Khloe said. "How's your heart rate?" "Probably elevated," Mrs. Marsh said. "I heard guns, but I'm not frightened. I was for about 2 minutes, and then I heard you talking in the corridor and I stopped being frightened." She paused. "Whatever you did tonight, young lady, Thank you for it. Khloe checked her vitals. Heart rate was elevated, but not alarmingly so. Blood pressure holding. She made the note. She stood up straight. Try to sleep, she said. At my age, sleep is a negotiation, Mrs. Marsh said. But I'll try. 3:24 a.m. Cole found her in the corridor between rooms 6 and 7. He was walking fast, which was not his usual tempo, and his face had the compressed expression of someone carrying information that had just gotten heavier since the last time he set it down. Halverson agreed to the terms, he said. He's coming in. When? 40 minutes. He's driving himself. No team. She looked at him. No team is either genuine or a very specific kind of trap. I know. I've got 2 of mine positioned outside, 2 inside. He walks through the main entrance and he's covered from the moment he steps out of the car. Cole paused. He asked for something. She waited. He asked that you be alone in the room, just you, when he talks. Of course he did, she said. I'm not agreeing to that. I am, she said. Cole stopped walking. Khloe, he asked for it because he has something to say that he doesn't want on record, which means it's something significant, which means I need to hear it. She looked at him directly. You'll have the room covered from outside. I'll have the conversation. That's how it works. You trust me on the outside coverage, but not enough to have me in the room, Cole said, and there was something in his voice that was not quite hurt, but was adjacent to it. She looked at him. I trust you, she said. I just trust myself more. He looked at her for a moment, then he let it go, which was the right decision. 40 minutes, he said. Tell me when he's 5 out. She went back to work. 3:31 a.m. She was at the nurse's station finishing the last of the vital notations when she heard the voice from the direction of the east corridor. And the voice stopped her the way a sound stops you when it comes from the exact wrong direction. It was Marco's voice, and it was not calm. She moved. She came around the corner to find Marco half standing, his damaged knee barely holding him, his face rigid with something that had pushed past pain into urgency. 2 of Cole's agents were in front of him, hands up, speaking in the controlled monotone of people trained to de-escalate, and Marco was talking over them. Listen to me, he was saying. You need to listen to me right now. Ramos, the man in Trauma Bay 2, he needs to be moved. Sir, you need to sit back down. I'm telling you, if Halverson is coming here tonight, Ramos cannot be in that room when he arrives. You don't understand what Halverson... Marco! Chloe's voice cut through it. He looked at her instantly. The agents looked at her. She walked to him and she put a hand on his arm, not restraining, just present, the way you stood next to someone who was going to fall if they didn't get a reason to stand still. Sit down, she said. Talk to me. He sat. He did it with the careful, controlled motion of someone managing significant pain and refusing to acknowledge it. She crouched in front of him so they were at eye level. Halverson, he said, low and fast. Ramos knows him, not from documents, personally. Halverson has been running both sides of this for 3 years. He has people inside the cartel and people inside your federal structure. And the information Ramos gave 6 weeks ago, the information he traded for his daughter's safety, it doesn't just expose the cartel. He stopped. He looked at her. It exposes Halverson. The thing that had been pulling at the edge of her mind since Cole said the director's name 3 hours ago went completely still. Because there it was. The thing worth more than a 6-year asset and a deep placement in a hospital full of civilians. The thing you burned everything else to protect. Ramos wasn't a third-tier logistics coordinator. He was a witness. How long have you known this? She asked. Since the car ride 6 weeks ago, Marco said. He talked the whole way. I don't think he cared anymore about being careful. He just talked. His jaw tightened. I drove him to the federal building and I thought I was doing the right thing. And then 3 days later, I got the call telling me to be part of tonight's team, and I understood what had happened, what I'd walked into. You came anyway, she said. I have a brother, he said. 17 years old. He's in their system. If I hadn't come tonight. He stopped. He didn't finish it. He didn't have to. She looked at him for a long moment. A man who had made a terrible choice because his alternative was someone he loved, paying the price for his conscience. She thought about Torres. She thought about how many of the people in this story had arrived at the same place from different directions. We're going to move Ramos, she said, right now. She stood up. She looked at Cole's two agents. Get Dr. Webb. Get Soo Jin. We're transferring the patient in Trauma Bay 2 to the upper floor ICU. Do it quietly and do it in the next 10 minutes. The agents looked at each other. One of them said, Agent Cole should authorize. Call him on your way, Khloe said. He'll authorize it. Move. They moved. 3:38 a.m. The transfer took 8 minutes, and it was the most complicated 8 minutes of the night, in a different way from all the other complicated minutes, because this kind of complicated had nothing to do with violence and everything to do with the particular precision of moving a critical patient on pressors through a hospital corridor without destabilizing everything keeping him alive. Webb was pale and focused. Soo Jin was steady in the way she was always steady, the way that had made Khloe notice her on her second day, that quiet competence that didn't announce itself. The gurney moved. The monitors moved. The IV lines held. They got Ramos to the ICU on the 4th floor, and Soo Jin got him connected to the new monitors, and Webb checked every line and every reading with the thoroughness of someone who had decided that whatever else happened tonight, this man was not going to die on his watch. He's stable, Soo Jin said when it was done. She said it the way she had said it the first time, in Trauma Bay 2, with her arms spread between a cartel assassin and the bed. The same words, the same steady voice. Good, Khloe said. Both of you stay with him. Nobody comes through that door who isn't me, Cole, or Patricia. What about Halverson? Webb asked. He had clearly been listening. That was fine. Webb was going to know everything by morning anyway. Especially not Halverson, she said. 3:44 a.m. Cole's call came when she was in the elevator going back down. He's 5 out, Cole said. Is he alone? Appears to be. One vehicle, sedan, moving at normal speed. Appears to be, she said. We're covering it, he said. What happened with Ramos? I'll brief you after. She stepped out of the elevator. Where do you want me? Break room. It's central. It's contained. It's got 2 points of access I can cover from outside. Fine, she said. Cole. Yes. Whatever he tells me in that room, whatever the larger picture is, I need you to trust that I'm going to give it to you straight. A pause. I know you will. Okay, she said. Send him in. She went to the break room. She sat down at the table in the center of it, the same table where she had eaten lunch for 6 weeks, and listened to Danny's jokes and Patricia's criticisms and the background rhythm of a hospital doing its job. She put her hands flat on the table. She waited. She heard the main entrance open at 3:51 a.m. She heard footsteps she didn't recognize, measured and deliberate, moving through the hospital with the particular confidence of someone who had been in buildings like this before and was not intimidated by them. She heard Cole's voice briefly, exchanged words she couldn't make out, and then the footsteps continued. Director Alan Halverson appeared in the doorway of the break room at 3:52 a.m. He was 61 years old, and he looked at tonight in a way he usually managed not to. Silver-haired, broad-shouldered, carrying the authority of his position the way certain men carried weight, not as a burden, but as a center of gravity. He had been decorated 4 times. He had testified before Congress twice. He had shaken the hand of 2 presidents. He looked at Khloe Adams sitting at a break room table in blue scrubs, with dried blood on her left sleeve that wasn't hers, and he said, "You really did it." "Sit down," she said. He sat. He looked at the table. He looked at her hands flat on it. He said, "You know." "I know enough," she said. "You're going to give me the rest." He looked at her for a long moment, Not calculating, exactly, more like a man who had arrived at the moment he had been managing toward for a while and was deciding how to enter it. Ramos gave you the full picture, I assume, through Marco. The full picture from Ramos's angle, she said. I want yours. He leaned back slightly. 3 years ago, I made a decision that I believed was correct, and that if I'm being accurate, I still believe was correct. I built a channel, a controlled information channel between a specific cartel structure and a federal oversight apparatus. Not a corruption arrangement, a management structure. The kind of thing that sounds unconscionable until you look at what it replaced, which was uncontrolled cartel activity through 6 border states in 42 cities. He paused. You contain what you can't eliminate. That's not corruption. That's governance. You ran both sides, she said. I managed both sides, he said. There's a difference. When it's your definition, there is, she said. Ramos found out. Ramos was inside the structure from the beginning, Halverson said. He understood what it was. He functioned within it for 2 years. Then his daughter got sick, and he needed resources that the arrangement couldn't provide cleanly, and he made the decision to extract himself. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He went to Cole's division, which I don't control. So you tried to have him killed before he could testify. I tried to recover a situation, Halverson said. There's a difference. You keep finding differences, she said, because they exist. He leaned forward. His voice stayed even, but something beneath it had shifted. Something that was closer to urgency than anything else she had heard from him. What Ramos knows, what he told your federal handlers, it does not end with me. It ends with the structure I built. And the structure I built is the only reason that 3 specific border crossing networks are under any kind of management at all. You dismantle it, you get chaos. You get 400% increase in uncontrolled trafficking through sectors that are already barely functional. The people who get hurt are not in this hospital. They're in communities that nobody in that oversight hearing is going to name. He stopped. I'm not asking you to understand it. I'm asking you to sit with the complexity of it before you decide what to do next. The break room was very quiet. Khloe looked at him. She looked at the man who had sent 4 armed men into a hospital and had burned Torres and had placed her, specifically, in this building like a piece on a board. She looked at him and she did the thing she always did. She separated what she felt from what she knew, set the feeling down carefully, and looked at what remained. What remained was this. He was not lying. She could hear the truth in it, not the truth of correctness, but the truth of belief. He believed what he was saying. He had built something he thought was justified, and he had protected it the way people protected things they believed in, without asking whether the method of protection had already invalidated the thing being protected. The people who died building your structure, she said, the ones who didn't know they were inside a management arrangement, were they a complexity you sat with? Something moved across his face. It was brief, but it was real. Yes, he said. And Torres, she said, she has an 8-year-old daughter. I know, he said. Did you sit with that complexity too? A longer pause. Yes, he said, and this time it cost him something. She looked at him for a long moment. What do you want from this conversation? She asked. The real answer. He met her eyes. I want you to be the one to decide what happens next, he said. Not Cole, not the oversight committee, you. Because you're the only person in this building who has operated in the spaces where these decisions actually live. You know what it costs. You know what the alternative looks like. And you are not, he paused, going to perform outrage for an audience. It was, she thought, the most honest thing he had said. It was also a manipulation, both things at once. That was how the best manipulations worked. They came wrapped in something real. I need 5 minutes, she said. He nodded. He sat back. He folded his hands on the table the way you folded your hands when you had said what you came to say, and you were willing to live in the space after it. She stood up. She walked to the door. She stepped into the corridor and she breathed. 4:01 a.m. Cole was waiting in the corridor outside. He had heard enough through the coverage. She could see it in his face, the particular expression of a man who had just had the architecture of 3 years of his professional life quietly revised. "He's not wrong about the structure," Cole said low, "about what happens if it collapses without a replacement." "I know," she said, "but he's also—" "I know," she said again. "So what do we do?" She looked at the corridor. She looked at the nurse's station where Patricia was doing what Patricia always did, which was the work, one task at a time, steady and unhurried and completely essential. She looked at the door to the room where Mrs. Marsh was probably still awake, conducting her negotiation with sleep, thinking about what she had heard through thin walls. She thought about Danny in the East Corridor, doing his vital checks with the careful, rebuilt focus of someone reconstructing their steadiness, one room at a time. She thought about Ramos on the 4th floor with Sujin, watching his monitors. She thought about his daughter, 12 years old, somewhere safe tonight because Torres had made one terrible choice and then tried to unmake it at the cost of everything. She thought about the teenager with the broken collarbone. The hard part already happened. You're here. The rest is just details. "We document everything," she said. "All of it. The structure, the channel, every decision Halverson made, and every justification he has for it. We document it completely and we put it in front of people who are equipped to weigh it. Not us. Not tonight. The right people, in the right process, with the full information." She looked at Cole. "And we make sure Ramos survives long enough to be part of that conversation, because he's not just a witness. He's the person who decided that his daughter's safety was worth telling the truth. And that decision deserves to land somewhere that honors it." Cole was quiet. Then, "Halverson will be taken into custody." "Yes. He won't cooperate with that quietly." "He already cooperated," she said. "He came here tonight and he told me the truth. That's a man who, on some level, has been waiting for the moment to stop carrying this alone." She paused. "He built something he thought was right, and he protected it past the point where protecting it made any sense. But he came here without a team, and he told me the truth. Work with that." Cole looked at her for a long moment. "You would have been good at this side of it," he said. "The agency side." "I'm good at this side of it," she said, gesturing down the corridor. "The nurse side." He almost smiled. Not quite. "Go tell him," he said. She went back into the break room. 4:06 a.m. Halverson was still sitting exactly where she had left him. He looked up when she came in and he read her face before she said a word, the way experienced operators read faces, looking for the tell of a decision already made. He found it. "Documentation," he said. "Full and complete," she said. "Every piece. Your testimony, Ramos's testimony, Torres's account when she's well enough to give it, the whole structure, and the operational argument, the management rationale. In the record," she said, "fully, every piece of your reasoning, documented and submitted. The people making the decision get the complete picture." He was quiet for a moment. "And my team, the operational team that I built, the people who worked within the structure in good faith. That's for the process to determine," she said. "Not me. I'm not a judge. I'm a nurse." He looked at her steadily. Something shifted. Not surrender exactly, more like a man setting down something he had been holding in both hands for a very long time and feeling the particular exhaustion of the moment when the weight finally leaves your grip. "Torres," he said. "She tried to fix it," Khloe said. "That's in the record too." He nodded. Cole came in behind her, 2 agents behind him. Halverson looked at Cole. Cole looked at Halverson. Neither of them said anything for a moment, the way men looked at each other across the distance of a professional relationship that had just become something else entirely. "Alan," Cole said finally. "Marcus," Halverson said. He stood up slowly. He put his hands up without being asked, wrists together. Not defiant, not dramatic, just done. Khloe stepped back. She let Cole do the rest. 4:14 a.m. The hospital was quieter than it had been at any point in the last 2 hours. Not silent, it was never silent. The monitors in the ventilation and the particular breathing of a building full of living bodies would not allow silence. But quieter. The specific quality of 4 a.m. in a place that had been through something and was deciding how to continue. Patricia found her at the nurse's station again. This seemed to be where Patricia always found her, which made a certain kind of sense. It was where the work was. Cole's people are finishing up, Patricia said. I know. The 4 of them are being transported in about 20 minutes. Marco needs his knee documented before transfer, Khloe said. And the young one, the one in the East Corridor, check his blood pressure. He was showing signs of acute stress response. Patricia looked at her. You're worried about the health of the men who came in here with guns. I'm a nurse, Khloe said. It's not conditional. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm going to have to write an incident report about tonight. Yes. What exactly do I put in the section that asks for the name and position of the staff member who secured the situation? Khloe looked at the chart in her hands. She looked at the nurse's station, the familiar surface of it, the coffee rings and the clip pens and the stacked charts that represented 6 weeks of her life that had been both entirely real and entirely constructed and somehow, against all probability, entirely hers. Put Khloe Adams, she said, nurse, 6 weeks on the job. Patricia held her gaze. That's all? That's all. Patricia made the note. 4:19 a.m. Danny appeared from the direction of the East Corridor, moving with a slightly dazed energy of someone coming down from something large and realizing the ground was still there. He stopped at the nurse's station. He looked at Khloe and then at Patricia, and then at the chart in Khloe's hands. Did we just... He started. He stopped. He started again. Did tonight just actually happen? Documented in your notes, Patricia said. Professional language only. Patricia. Danny, I just need someone to tell me tonight actually happened. It happened, Khloe said. You were on the floor, and then you got up and you did your job. That's what happened. Danny looked at her. Something moved across his face, something that was going to take him days to fully feel. The way the real weight of something never arrived in the moment, only later, when you were somewhere ordinary and suddenly you understood what the ordinary was sitting on top of. Yeah, he said quietly. I guess that is what happened. He picked up a chart. He went to do the work. 4:23 a.m. She went to check on Mrs. Marsh one more time before the shift changed. Mrs. Marsh was asleep. Finally, her heart rate was steady and even on the monitor, that familiar rhythm that Khloe had checked 3 times tonight and would check again because that was what you did. That was what the job was. You kept checking the things that needed checking, and you did not stop because something larger had happened around them. She stood in the doorway for a moment and listened to the monitor. She thought about what came next, the debrief, the documentation, the conversations about Halverson and the structure and the process that would take months, and the decision about who she was going forward, whether Khloe Adams survived this night or whether the name was burned along with everything else. She thought about what she wanted. She thought about Mrs. Marsh saying, both of them sound exhausting. She thought about the decimal points that genuinely made her nervous, and the teenager whose breathing she had steadied, and the supply closet she had genuinely walked into by mistake. Because on day 6, everything had looked the same. She thought about Patricia making the note. Khloe Adams, nurse, 6 weeks on the job. She stepped back from the doorway. She walked back to the nurse's station. She picked up the next chart in the stack. She began to read it carefully, looking for the number, making sure she had the right decimal place, because the difference mattered and it was always worth checking. The shift continued. The hospital breathed around her. Outside, through windows she wasn't looking at, The city was beginning to decide it was almost morning. The next chart in the stack belonged to a man named Gerald Hoffman, 68 years old, post-op from a hip replacement, whose main complaint since admission had been that the television remote only had 4 working buttons, and none of them changed the channel. She had heard him explain this problem to 3 different nurses over the past week, with the patient, detailed frustration of a man who had decided this was the injustice worth focusing on. She had found it quietly funny each time. She read his vitals from the last check. She made her note. She set the chart down. She picked up the next one. She did this for 11 minutes. Just the work, just the charts and the numbers and the ordinary, essential machinery of a hospital floor at 4:30 in the morning. Nobody spoke to her. Patricia was moving through the rooms on the other end of the corridor. Danny was somewhere she could hear but not see, his footsteps familiar enough by now that she didn't need to look. It was the most normal 11 minutes of the entire night, and they were also, in a way she couldn't have explained to anyone who hadn't lived something similar, the most necessary. 4:41 a.m., Cole came back. He came back without the agents and without the compressed urgency of earlier, and he stood at the nurse's station, and he looked at her doing the charts, and he said nothing for a moment, just watching, the way you watch something you were trying to memorize before the circumstances changed. "He's in custody," Cole said. "Halverson, transport left 6 minutes ago. Ramos? Stable on 4. Webb says the blood pressure has been holding for 40 minutes straight. Sujin won't leave the room." "She won't," Khloe agreed. "Marco is being transported. He asked me to give you something." Cole reached into his jacket pocket and put a folded piece of paper on the counter. He wrote it while one of my agents was documenting his injury. Wouldn't say what it was. She looked at the paper. She didn't pick it up yet. "And the young one? The one from the East Corridor?" 19 years old, Cole said. "His name is Esteban. His mother lives in Pilsen. He's been in the organization for 14 months because they had his older brother." He paused. "I'm going to see what we can do with that." She looked at him. "Thank you." "Don't." He shook his head slightly. "I should have done more of that thinking 6 months ago, before any of this had to happen." He looked at the counter, at the charts, at the ordinary tools of her ordinary job sitting in a row under fluorescent lights. "Torres is out of surgery, critical but stable. Her daughter is with the foster family she's been placed with for the last 2 years." Khloe absorbed that. She set it down carefully in the place where she was keeping all the things that were going to need attending to later, when the immediate crisis had fully passed and the longer, quieter work began. "Good," she said. "There's something else," Cole said. She looked at him. "Halverson, in the car before we got him into transport, he asked me to tell you something." Cole's jaw worked slightly, the way it did when he was carrying a sentence he wasn't sure about. He said, "The placement was not just tactical. He said he put you at Mercy West because he thought if it came to this, if the structure came apart and someone had to be in the middle of it, he wanted it to be someone who would make the right call." He paused. He said he trusted your judgment more than he trusted the process. The break room. His voice. "I want you to be the one to decide what happens next." The most honest thing he had said. The manipulation inside it. "He trusted my judgment enough to put me in danger without my consent," she said. "Yes," Cole said. "He did." "That's not trust," she said. "That's using someone's capability as a justification for using them." "I know. Write that in the documentation." "I will." She picked up the folded piece of paper Marco had left. She opened it. 4 lines, written in the cramped, slightly unsteady hand of a man writing with a damaged arm from a bad angle. She read it. She read it again. She folded it back up and put it in the pocket of her scrubs. Cole watched her do it. He didn't ask. "What happens to the testimony?" she said. "The full documentation, Halverson's account and Ramos's account, and what Torres gave you before she went quiet. What happens to it?" "Oversight committee," Cole said. There are 3 people on that committee I trust completely. The rest I'm less certain about. The rest knew Halverson, she said. Some of them, yes. Then we need to be careful about sequencing. What gets submitted first? How it gets framed. She looked at the charts in front of her. Halverson's argument about the structure isn't nothing. The committee needs to hear it complete, not cherry-picked. The people who built the channel in good faith need to be distinguished from the people who protected it through harm. Those are different categories, and they need to be treated as different categories. Cole looked at her steadily. You're going to help build the case. I'm going to make sure the case is accurate, she said. There's a difference. He almost smiled again. This time it got a little further. When can you sit down with our documentation team? After my shift ends, she said, at 7 a.m. He blinked. You're finishing your shift. I'm finishing my shift, she said. These are my patients. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, I'll have a team at Mercy West at 7:15. He straightened up. He started to turn. Then he stopped. For what it's worth, he said, Halverson was right about one thing. The judgment call. The way tonight ended. He paused. That was you. All of it. Nobody else gets credit for how this landed. She looked at him. Go get some sleep, Cole. Not a chance, he said, and he left. 5:02 a.m. The shift change was at 7, which meant she had just under 2 hours left, and those 2 hours moved the way early morning hours in a hospital always moved, with the particular thick quality of time that has been stretched thin by the night and is now settling back into its own weight. She did the rounds. She checked the monitors. She updated the charts. She handed a cup of water to Mr. Hoffman, who had given up on the television entirely and was now complaining about the pillow thickness. And she listened to him for 3 full minutes because he was 68 years old and had been through a frightening night, even if he didn't know the specifics of it. And listening cost her nothing and gave him something. Sujin called from the ICU at 5:14 to report that Ramos had regained consciousness for approximately 90 seconds, had said one sentence, and had gone back under. What did he say? Khloe asked. A brief pause. He said, Is my daughter safe? That was it, just that. What did you tell him? I told him yes, Sujin said. Was that right? Yes, Khloe said. That was exactly right. At 5:31, Danny came to the nurse's station and leaned on the counter in the particular way he leaned when he needed to say something and was negotiating with himself about how to say it. She waited. She had learned his rhythm. My mom called, he said finally. She heard something on the scanner. She just wanted to know I was okay. Are you? Yeah. He turned the word over, testing it. Yeah, I actually am. Which is weird, because I should probably not be, right? Like, objectively, tonight was a lot, she said. But I'm okay. He looked at his hands. I was scared. I was really scared down on that floor. I didn't think I was going to be that scared. Scared is honest, she said. You weren't scared, he said. Not an accusation, just an observation. She looked at him. I was scared, she said. I'm still scared. I've just had more practice at doing the job while scared. He absorbed this. Is that something you get better at? Over time? Yes, she said. You get better at it. It doesn't go away. You just get better at working alongside it instead of waiting for it to stop. He was quiet for a moment. Then, I'm going to apply for the critical care rotation, he said. In the spring. I've been putting it off because I thought I wasn't ready. You are, she said. You've known me 6 weeks. I've seen you work for 6 weeks, she said. I know enough. He looked at her. Then he stood up straight and he nodded, and he went back to the floor with a slightly different quality of a person who has just been told something they needed to hear at exactly the moment they needed to hear it. 5:48 a.m. Patricia found her one final time in the East Corridor. Not at the nurse's station, which was unusual. Patricia almost always found her at the nurse's station. The east corridor was more deliberate, more private. She stopped beside Khloe, and they stood together for a moment, in the way you stood with someone when you were not yet ready to begin the conversation, but were done with the alternative of not having it. My first year, Patricia said, I had a patient who coded in the hallway. No cart, no team, just me and a first-year resident who was more scared than I was. I did compressions for 11 minutes before backup arrived. She paused. 11 minutes is a very long time to keep doing something when you don't know if it's working. Khloe looked at her. He lived, Patricia said. The patient. He sent me a Christmas card for 9 years after. Every year the same card, just his name and a date. The date he didn't die. She was quiet. I kept every one of them. Patricia, Khloe said, I'm not finished. She turned to face her directly. I've been doing this for 22 years, and I have never felt like I did tonight. When I looked up from that floor and saw you standing there with that oxygen canister and that face you had. She stopped. She was choosing her words with surgical precision. I felt safe, she said. In the worst moment I have experienced in 22 years of night shifts, I felt safe because of you. And I need you to know I'm going to be annoyed about it for quite some time, because I do not enjoy having my assumptions revised this dramatically. Khloe looked at the charge nurse who had spent 6 weeks expecting nothing from her and had spent last night being the second most competent person in the building without anyone having to ask her to be. You were already doing the job before I got off the floor, she said. I saw you counting. I saw you assessing. You were already ahead of it. I was terrified. And counting, Khloe said. At the same time, that's not nothing. That's actually everything. Patricia held her gaze. Then she made the smallest, most controlled sound that might, in different circumstances, in a different person, have been the beginning of something more. She pressed it down. She straightened. She looked at the corridor. 7 o'clock comes fast, she said. It does, Khloe said. The overnight notes need updating before shift change. I'll have them done by 6:30. You'd better. Patricia turned and walked back toward the nurse's station, her steps as measured and deliberate as they had been at 11 p.m., as they would be, Khloe suspected, until the day Patricia Reyes decided she was done, which was going to be a very long time from now, because the woman was built from the specific material that did not wear down. 6:17 a.m. She was at the nurse's station finishing the overnight notes when she heard the elevator. She knew the elevator's sound by now, the specific tone it made at different floors, the slightly longer pause it took at 4 because the doors on 4 were heavier. This was not 4. This was ground floor. This was someone coming down. Dr. Webb appeared from the stairwell instead, which meant he had not taken the elevator at all and had been on his way for longer than the elevator sound suggested. He walked to the nurse's station with the slightly hollowed expression of a man who had been running on crisis fuel for 4 hours and had just felt it run out. He stopped in front of her. He looked at the notes she was writing. He looked at her face. I don't know what to say to you, he said. You don't have to say anything. I almost left, he said, his voice dropped slightly. In Trauma Bay 2, when they first came in, I thought about unlocking that door and walking out, trying to get to an exit. She looked at him. I didn't, he said, but I thought about it. That's honest, she said. I thought about it for about 4 seconds and then Sujin put her arms out and I couldn't. He looked at his hands the way Danny had looked at his hands, the gesture of people checking to see if they were still the same hands they'd always had. She's 25 years old and she stood in front of that bed without anybody asking her to. She's a nurse, Khloe said. Yeah, he was quiet. Yeah, she is. He looked up. You're both nurses. Yes. And you're also, yes, she said, both things. He nodded slowly, working through it. Dr. Marcus Webb, who had raised his eyebrows at her 6 weeks ago, and had added his voice to the general consensus that she was unremarkable, was rebuilding something in real time and doing it with the methodical care of someone who intended to get it right. "I'm sorry," he said. "For the first 6 weeks," she looked at him. "You didn't do anything wrong," she said. "You saw what was there." "I saw what I expected," he said. "That's different." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she said, "Ramos is going to need a medical team that understands his full situation when he's well enough to transfer. Someone who can be trusted with the context." She paused. "I'd recommend you for that team." He blinked. "Me?" "You stayed in that room," she said. "You kept him alive under pressure. That's the person he needs." Webb was quiet for a long moment. Something moved across his face, and this was a man who she had learned did not show things easily, who wore his competence like armor and kept everything underneath it to himself. What moved across his face was something raw and careful and real. "Thank you," he said. He went back to the elevator. She went back to the notes. 6:44 a.m. The folded paper in her pocket had been there for 2 hours, and she had been aware of it with the particular awareness of something you are not ready to look at again, but cannot forget is there. She took it out now, at the nurse's station, in the gray pre-shift light of 6:44 in the morning, and she unfolded it one more time. Marco had written 4 lines. The first line was a name. Not Ramos, a different name. A name she recognized from the task force files as someone 3 levels above Ramos in the structure. Someone who had never appeared on a witness list. Someone who Halverson's documentation, thorough as it was, had not included. The second line was a location. The third line was a number. The fourth line said, "He turned himself in because of his daughter. I drove him. I know who else should." She read it 3 times. She folded it. She put it in her pocket. She thought about Marco on the floor with his knee, offering her the name of a man he had served for years. She thought about what it cost to write something like that, the calculation behind it, not altruism. She was not naive enough to call it that, but something in the same family. Something that started with a man thinking about his 17-year-old brother and ended with 4 lines on a piece of paper that could, if handled correctly, open a case that Halverson's fall alone would never reach. She was going to give it to Cole at 7:15. She was going to make sure it was handled correctly. 6:58 a.m. The day shift began arriving at 6:50. The familiar shuffle of fresh scrubs and coffee cups, and the transition energy of people walking into something they didn't yet know had changed. She watched them come through the doors with the particular vision of someone who had been awake for the entire night. That slightly heightened, slightly unreal clarity that came at the end of long stretches, where everything looked both ordinary and unbearably significant at the same time. A nurse named Rosa, who had been at Mercy West for 3 years and always started her shift with the same playlist on her earbuds and the same efficient sweep of the nurse's station, came in, pulled out one earbud, looked at the notes stack and said, "Busy night?" "Moderate," Khloe said. Rosa nodded. She looked at the notes. She pulled out the other earbud. "These are really thorough," she said, looking at Khloe's overnight documentation. "I had time," Khloe said. "You always do," Rosa said, in a tone that meant she had noticed and approved, and went to start her rounds. Patricia came to the station at 7 exactly, because Patricia was always on time, and she did the handoff with the incoming charge with the brisk, comprehensive precision that she always used, covering every patient, every flag, every note, everything that mattered about the state of the floor at the exact moment of transition. She covered it all. She did not mention anything else. When the incoming charge went to do her initial walkthrough, Patricia stood at the nurse's station for a moment beside Khloe. They stood in silence. The floor was waking around them. "Go home," Patricia said. "I have a meeting at 7:15, Khloe said. "After the meeting." "Yes." "Sleep." "Yes." "And Adams." Patricia picked up her bag from under the counter. She looked at Khloe with the direct, uncomplicated attention she gave to things she had decided to commit to. I'm putting in a formal recommendation for your permanent placement on this floor. I've already written it. Khloe looked at her. Patricia. I'm not asking, Patricia said. I'm telling you what I've already done. She paused. This is your floor. You've been doing the work since day one. The rest of last night was just additional information. She straightened her bag on her shoulder. Try not to walk into any more supply closets. She walked out. 7:09 a.m. Cole arrived 6 minutes early with a documentation team of 2 and the slightly rearranged face of a man who had been awake for 24 hours and was running on purpose. He set up in the break room. He had coffee. He had the good kind from somewhere outside the hospital, and he put a cup in front of her without comment. She sat across the table from him and looked at the recording equipment and the documents already laid out in the particular business-like arrangement of everything. And she thought about sitting at this same table less than 3 hours ago, looking at Halverson across it. Different room now, same table, different purpose. She took out Marco's folded paper. She put it on the table in front of Cole. He looked at it. He looked at her. He unfolded it. She watched his face as he read the 4 lines. She watched the thing that moved through it, the recognition, the rapid assessment, the moment where he understood what he was holding. He read it twice. He set it down carefully. How reliable is this? He asked. He drove Ramos to the federal building 6 weeks ago, she said. He was inside the structure. He knows the names and the locations because he worked them. She paused. He wrote that because of his brother, because he wants his brother out of the system, and he's trading what he has to get that. That's transparent, and it's self-interested, and it doesn't make the information wrong. Cole looked at the paper. This opens a case that we've had nothing on for 3 years. I know. Khloe, he looked up. This is significant. I know, she said. That's why I'm giving it to you instead of sitting on it. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, when Torres is well enough, when Ramos is transferred and stable and the full documentation is submitted, when this case is open and moving, you're going to need to think about your placement. I know. Khloe Adams is burned, he said. Not unkindly, just accurately. Halverson's people know the name. Even with him in custody, the structure doesn't disappear overnight. There are people who know who you are now. She looked at the table, at the coffee cup Cole had brought, at the break room around her, the same break room where she had eaten lunch for 6 weeks and listened to the hospital breathe. She thought about Patricia's formal recommendation, already written, sitting somewhere in the administrative system. She thought about Danny applying for the critical care rotation. She thought about Sujin's arms spread in front of a hospital bed. She thought about Mrs. Marsh and the Christmas cards a patient had sent for 9 years. Just a name and a date. I know, she said again. Cole waited. I'm going to need some time to think about it, she said, after I sleep. Of course. But Cole, she looked at him directly. Whatever happens with the placement and the name and the rest of it, the floor stays. I'm not leaving medicine. He looked at her. I know what I am, she said. I've always known what I am. Captain Jennett was part of it. The task force was part of it. And this is part of it. The charts and the decimal points and the vital checks. And the guy in room 5 who can't work his TV remote. She paused. I'm not going back to only one of those things. I'm both. I've always been both. And I'm done pretending one of them doesn't exist. Cole held her gaze for a long moment. Something in his face settled, the way things settled when they arrived at a position that was correct and recognized as correct. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. She picked up the coffee. She drank it. It was the good kind, strong and clean, and exactly the right temperature. And it landed in her chest alongside the exhaustion and the adrenaline residue and the long, layered weight of a night that had started with a charge nurse's exasperation and ended with 4 lines on a folded piece of paper that was going to open a case 3 years in the waiting. The documentation team began. She answered their questions precisely and completely, and without editorializing, the way she had been trained to give information, the way she had learned over 6 weeks to take a patient history, the same fundamental discipline applied to a different kind of record. She talked for 48 minutes. She told them everything. 8:03 a.m. She walked out of Mercy West Medical Center at 8:03 in the morning, through the main entrance, into the gray and copper early light of a Chicago morning that had not yet decided whether it was going to be cold or merely cool. She stood on the sidewalk outside the entrance for a moment, not because she needed to, not to look back, not for any reason she could have named clearly. She just stood there and breathed the outside air and let the weight of the last 9 hours sit exactly where it was, present and undiminished, neither more nor less than what it had been. She thought about what came next, the calls, the decisions, the careful, unglamorous work of building something that was going to take a long time and was not going to be finished with one night, no matter how much one night had changed. She thought about Ramos on the 4th floor, regaining consciousness for 90 seconds and asking the only question that mattered to him. She thought about the answers Soo Jin had given without hesitation. Yes, she's safe. Yes. Khloe Adams had walked into Mercy West Medical Center 6 weeks ago as a rookie nurse with a cover identity and a past she had promised herself she was done with. She was walking out of it as something more complicated and more honest. A woman who had stopped pretending that her two selves were in conflict, who had held a hospital full of people together in the dark, using everything she had ever been, and who was going to come back tomorrow and the day after and every day after that and do the work. All of it with both hands, completely and without apology. She put her hands in her pockets. Her right hand found the folded piece of paper, habit, the check of a person who does not lose important things. It was there. She walked toward the parking structure. The hospital stood behind her, breathing steadily, doing what it had always done, what it would keep doing, holding the worst moments of people's lives and continuing anyway. And inside it, on a floor that was already filling with the ordinary noise and motion of a new day, a charge nurse named Patricia Reyes was writing a recommendation for permanent placement, and a nurse named Danny Chen was starting his rounds with the careful, rebuilt focus of someone who had learned something true about himself in the dark. And a woman named Soo Jin Park was watching a monitor on the 4th floor with the unhurried attention of someone who understood exactly what the numbers meant and was not going to look away. The work went on. That was the thing about hospitals. The work always went on, and so did she.